Okay, this is going to be our next part of the 20th New York State Militia at Gettysburg here on Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate, and we're in the National Cemetery looking at the Soldiers' National Monument. And as I turn around and I look on the ground here, we are standing at the New York State plot in which 867 New Yorkers are buried here in this parcel of ground, including 11 from the 20th New York State Militia. And we looked at the 20th New York State Militia all the way from them in Maryland, their march to Gettysburg, day 1, day 2, day 3, and a lot of their actions. And here near the end of the video series, we want to honor some of the fallen men of the 20th New York State Militia by talking a little bit about their final resting spots here in the New York plot of the Soldiers' National Cemetery. And we're going to start with John Ross Horner. We left off in our last part at the Horner Farm, and I noted that Captain John Horner, he was a captain of Cole's Cavalry. It actually went to Bull Run and got his son's body and returned it here to Gettysburg. And John Ross Horner may be the only soldier buried in the National Cemetery in the original section, state section, that wasn't killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. He was a local man who was killed at the Battle of Bull Run. And as we go over here, we're going to take a look at his gravesite. It is the grave of Lieutenant John Ross Horner of Company K, the 20th New York State Militia. He was born on January the 12th, 1837, and he was killed at Second Bull Run on August 30th, 1862. His father, of course, was a captain in Cole's, Maryland Cavalry, and he was a local Adams County boy that lived here prior to going to New York. If you remember, he was in literary school in New York when the war broke out, and he signed up with his friend Ambrose Baldwin. He is buried here in the New York plot, Section E, Site 69. This is the grave of Private Alexander D. Tice. Alexander was killed on July 1st, 1863, basically at the front doorstep of the Emanuel Harmon farm, as he, along with his company, attempted to seize the house and hold up North Carolina troops of Pettigrew's brigade. On the march to Gettysburg, he had a premonition of his death, which he shared with his friend, Private Enos Vale, in which he says he did not think he would survive the battle, and he had never been in a battle before. And Enos jokingly said to him, "Well, I've been in all of them, and I've never even been wounded." The premonition of his death, of course, would come to pass at the doorstep of the Emanuel Harmon farm. He was born in 1841, and of course he was killed on July 1st, 1863. He's buried today in Section F, the New York plot, site number 3. Next to him, 2 graves down, is the grave of the highest ranking officer here killed at Gettysburg, Captain Joseph S. Corbin. And Corbin was the captain of Company F. Again, he was the highest ranking. He was a public school principal. He was shot through the head and killed instantly on July 1st, 1863. He left a wife and 2 kids. He's buried in Section F of the New York plot, site number 1. I need to adjust my camera here so we can get a better look at his grave. This has been our next part of the 20th New York State Militia here at the National Cemetery on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be our next part of the 20th New York State Militia here at Gettysburg, and we're here in the National Cemetery. We're looking at some more graves of the 20th New York State Militia men. And this is the only grave that we know that is unknown from the 20th New York State Militia. I did talk to Seward Osborne, and he has an idea who it may be, but his identity may only be known to God at this point. And these are the graves, I think, that are most special because they're heroes just like anyone who's buried in a military cemetery, but unfortunately their names and information about them are unknown only to God. So this is one of the more special graves here in the National Cemetery. Just over here, another special case would be the graves of 2 brothers. The first one is Company K Sergeant Lucius H. Decker of the 20th New York State Militia. Lucius Decker was 30 years old at the time of the battle. He was born in 1833, and he died on the 3rd day here, probably on the wall at Cemetery Ridge on July 3rd, 1863 during Pickett's charge. Next to him is Sergeant Menard Decker of Company K. And I also have Lucius listed as Company G. I'll have to check on that. But Menard Decker was 39 years old at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was born in 1824, and of course he died during the action of Pickett's charge at Cemetery Ridge on July 3rd, 1863. Both of these guys are buried in Section C of the New York plot. And in our next part, we're going to take a look at a couple more graves here. This has been the 20th New York State Militia in the National Cemetery here on Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate. Okay, we're back here in the National Cemetery, continuing our video series on the burial sites of some of the members of the 20th New York State Militia. And the next grave we're going to look at here is that of Sergeant Abraham W. Swart. He was a corporal in Company I of the 20th New York State Militia. He was born in 1842, and he died of his wounds on July the 25th, 1863. He's buried here in the New York plot, Section C, Site 87. And Abraham was wounded and taken to a nearby field hospital, and he survived till the 25th of July, and then he passed away, and of course he is buried here in the National Cemetery. We're going to continue on over to here. And this one is interesting because this is a grave that is marked wrong. It is the grave of Sergeant Luther W. Mcclellan. He was a sergeant in Company D of the 20th New York State Militia, and he was killed during the action of Pickett's charge on Cemetery Ridge on July 3rd, 1863. He's buried in the New York plot, Section A, Site 14, and I'm sorry, Site 41 rather. And Luther has today Regiment 2 period, so it's not something that's worn off. It's marked wrong, and most likely what happened here was Luther Mcclellan was buried here just after the Battle of Gettysburg. And when they first dug the trenches and laid the bodies in these graves, they had marked them with a wooden headstone marker. And over the next couple years, those markers began to wear. 3 or 4 years after the battle, the markers, the stone markers were put in the ground, and they actually were raised above the ground at one point. Most likely what happened was by then the zero must have worn off the original headboard. So when they copied the information from those stones onto the stone markers, it was not transferred over. So this is an instance where one of the graves has been mislabeled. And actually we're going to be crossing back over the graves of Sergeant Lucius Decker and Menard Decker right here that we looked at in another video. And our next grave is going to be right here. And this here is the grave of Private Nelson Southard of Company K. Nelson was 30 years old during the Battle of Gettysburg. He was born in 1833, and he was killed on July 3rd, 1863, on Cemetery Ridge during the action that we know as Pickett's Charge. He's buried in the New York plot, Section D, Site 13. This has been our next part of the 20th New York State Militia as we look at their grave sites here in the Soldiers National Cemetery here on Gettysburg Battlefield Ultimate.